Lucas McAllister was a man of logic and engineer by trade, a planner by nature. But nothing about what he saw that morning made any sense. He had just finished shoveling out the barn when he noticed the paper. It fluttered slightly in the dry, spring wind, taped and stapled to the old wrought iron gate that marked the front of the McAllister family ranch. The land had been in the family for over 80 years, passed from generation to generation, weathering storms, recessions, and wildfires, but never this. Lucas wiped his dusty hands on his jeans and walked toward it, brow furrowed. The document was thick, legal, full of numbers and codes. At the top, in bold block letters, Notice of Lien and Foreclosure, Glenridge Community Association. His heart stopped. Lien. He scanned the next few lines: dates, penalties, dollar amounts, then the bombshell. Due to non-payment of HOA dues totaling $1,473.19 and associated penalties. The parcel described below has been foreclosed upon and sold at auction to satisfy said debt. Lucas blinked. Read it again. He looked up at the wide hills of dry grass and white oak. Then back at the paper. The Glenridge Community Association was part of a subdivision, 2 miles away, cookie-cutter homes with vinyl siding and welcome flags. A neighborhood that hadn't even existed when his grandfather was raising cattle on this land. The McAllister Ranch was not part of that neighborhood. Never had been. He yanked the paper off the gate and drove into town, fists gripping the wheel harder than usual. The county clerk's office was quiet, dust motes spinning in shafts of sunlight. As he approached the front desk, the woman behind the counter adjusted her glasses and took the paper with a practiced frown. Huh, she murmured, flipping through it. Let me pull up the file. Lucas waited. It took 5 minutes before she returned with a folder. Then her eyes met his. Something had shifted in her expression. According to our records, this parcel lot 179B was sold 3 weeks ago. Buyer paid $25,000. Sold. Lucas nearly choked. To who? She turned the folder around and pointed to a name at the bottom. East Pines Holdings LLC, and this was signed off by the HOA. She nodded, eyes scanning the paper. Karen Detweiler, president of Glenridge Community Association. Lucas stepped back from the desk, stunned. Karen Detweiler. He remembered the name. She'd shown up once, maybe 2 years ago, after his grandfather's funeral. She brought a casserole and a brochure about community integration. Said she lived on Willow Trace Court and was working to beautify the edges of their growing neighborhood. She'd smiled a little too long, talked a little too fast, and something in her eyes hadn't matched her words. Lucas had walked her back to her car, and never thought of her again. Now she had signed off on the sale of his land. Back in his truck, Lucas sat motionless, the paper trembling in his hands. The drive back to the ranch was a blur of dust and roadside oak trees. He parked near the barn and stared across the land his grandfather built from scratch. Fencing, tool sheds, irrigation pipes all installed by hand. His grandfather had raised Angus cattle, sold hay to neighbors, and mentored every FFA kid who showed up with a question. And now, part of that land had been sold out from under him by a woman with a clipboard and a map. Lucas needed answers. And he needed them now. He pulled out his phone and searched for the Glenridge HOA office. Their website was bright and cheery, stock photos of smiling families and slogans about community strength. At the bottom, an address. The clubhouse sat in the center of the Glenridge development. Lucas drove there in 10 minutes. The contrast hit him hard. Manicured lawns, solar-powered street lamps, homes stacked too close together, each one nearly identical. He parked outside, a building with a faux brick exterior and a sign that read Community Resource Center. Inside, the air was cold and sterile. A receptionist asked his name. Lucas gave it. Do you have an appointment with Mrs. Detweiler? No, but I think she'll want to speak with me. The receptionist tapped something into her computer and picked up a phone. 5 minutes later, a door opened at the end of the hallway. And there she was, Karen Detweiler, perfect posture, pearl necklace, and a thin, controlled smile. Mr. McAllister, she said. I was wondering when you'd show up. Lucas followed Karen Detweiler into her office, the door clicking, shut behind him with a weight that felt personal. The room was spotless shelving lined with binders. Awards for community excellence, a bouquet of lilies on the desk that smelled overly sweet and artificial. Everything about the space seemed curated, controlled. Karen motioned to a chair, with a faint smile. Please, have a seat. Lucas remained standing. I'm here about the lien you slapped on my family's land. Karen clasped her hands on the desk, unbothered. Yes. I assumed that's why you came. A bit overdue, don't you think? He blinked. Overdue. I wasn't even notified this was happening. My land was never part of Glenridge, and suddenly, it's sold for pennies. She tilted her head. You mean the parcel south of the pasture? The undeveloped section that hasn't seen use in 2 years. Lucas stepped forward. It's not yours to touch. My family's owned that ranch since 1946, and we're not part of any HOA. Karen smiled thinly, pulling a printed map from her drawer and laying it on the desk. Actually, the district lines were redrawn last fall. Our expansion was approved. By the zoning board? Notices were published publicly on our bulletin, online, and in the Glenridge Gazette. That parcel was technically included. When no dues were paid and no objections filed, the lien process began legally. Lucas stared at the red-lined map. His family's land was outlined as if it had been absorbed like a dropped egg yolk in batter. No one knocked on my door. No letter. No certified mail. Karen adjusted her pearl necklace. Notices aren't always required to be hand-delivered. It's the homeowner's responsibility to remain informed. The county recognizes our procedures. Lucas's voice sharpened. And this buyerist Pines Holdings. Who are they? Her eyes didn't blink. We don't control who bids at auction. That's up to the market. Lucas exhaled through his nose, trying to keep from shouting. That's not the market. That's theft. Karen stood now, smoothing down her blazer. I understand this is upsetting, Mr. McAllister. Truly, but you've inherited a property without managing the details. That's no one's fault but your own. Lucas stared at her. There wasn't even a flicker of guilt. She wasn't defending herself. She didn't have to. She thought she'd won. As he turned to leave, she called out, "Oh, and, if you're thinking of fighting this in court, I'd advise against it. The cost will far outweigh the value of that tiny strip of land." Lucas paused. Her tone wasn't smug, it was surgical, practiced, like she'd done this before. He didn't respond. He left the office, jaw tight, fists balled, adrenaline pulsing, under his skin. Outside, Glenridge looked like a brochure kids on bikes, a woman walking her dog, wind chimes on porches. But Lucas saw it differently now. These weren't neighbors. This was a machine, and Karen Detweiler was the one pulling the gears. Back at the ranch, Lucas walked the south pasture for the first time in weeks. The grass here had grown higher, but the ground was still flat, clean. A few stakes stuck out of the dirt survey markers. New ones. A white sign had been posted at the edge of the fence. Future development site, authorized by Glenridge Community Association. He stood staring at it until the sun dipped behind the hills. His phone buzzed. It was a message from the county website. He had filed a notification request earlier that day. The name East Pines Holdings LLC had triggered a reference. The company had just been registered less than a month ago by a man named Connor R. Detweiler. Lucas stared at the name. A chill creeping down his spine. Connor Detweiler, Karen's son. She hadn't just signed off on a foreclosure. She had sold part of his grandfather's land to her own family. Under a false corporate name. Lucas lowered the phone. Rage boiling into resolve. She thought she'd buried him in red tape, but she just lit the match. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with a black coffee in one hand and a legal pad full of scribbles in the other. Every few minutes, he looked out toward the pasture. The stars above the hills were clearer than usual, as if they were paying attention. By dawn, he was already in town. He parked outside the county records office and marched straight to the back where the plat maps were kept. These were massive documents, official surveys of land boundaries, updated when properties were bought, sold, or Lucas found the one dated last year, before his grandfather had passed. Then he pulled the latest version, post-annexation. There it was. The change. Subtle, but deliberate. The redrawn lines bled past the Glenridge subdivision and into the southern strip of the McAllister Ranch. It looked like nothing, just a narrow 4-acre stretch of pasture land. But strategically, it was everything. That strip bordered the only paved road that accessed the ranch's back acreage. With it gone, the rest of the land could be choked off, devalued, rendered useless. He laid both maps side by side, running his finger along the old boundary. It was like someone had erased part of his inheritance with a red pen. "Need help?" asked a voice behind him. Lucas turned to see an older man in a county vestrisol, one of the senior clerks. "I'm trying to understand how a piece of land that's been outside Glenridge since the 40s was suddenly part of an HOA annexation. Russell walked closer and looked over the maps. He whistled low. This annexation was fast-tracked. That usually only happens when no objections are raised. You say your family owns this. My grandfather did. Now I do. Russell squinted at the name on the transfer form. Funny. This parcel shows as vacant at the time of annexation. No structures, no legal resident on file. Lucas frowned. Vacant. I've been living here since November. Russell tapped the folder, but the title wasn't officially transferred until March. That creates a gray zone. Lucas shook his head. So because I hadn't finalized paperwork fast enough, they claimed it was empty and used that to call it neglected. Exactly. HOA bylaws can get sneaky if someone's motivated. They used that gap to wedge themselves in. Lucas swallowed hard. So technically, it was my land. But legally, they slipped in during the confusion. Russell nodded. Looks that way. Back at the ranch, Lucas took out his grandfather's old lockbox, the one hidden in the workshop behind the oil drums. Inside were receipts, spare keys, an old army compass and, more importantly, letters. A stack of correspondence between his grandfather and the Glenridge HOA. One envelope was thick with printed emails. He opened it carefully. The top letter was from Karen Detweiler, dated a year ago. Dear Mr. McAllister, as you are aware, Glenridge Community Association is considering a modest expansion. We believe the southern border of your property is no longer in active use and would better serve the community with development. We'd be happy to offer compensation should you agree to the annexation. Lucas flipped through 3 more letters, each one more assertive. Each one ending with a suggestion that it was in the best interest of the community to integrate the ranch. Then a handwritten reply from his grandfather, barely legible in his shaky cursive. No, stop asking. This land is not abandoned, and it's not for sale. That letter was dated 8 months ago, before his death, before the annexation map was redrawn. Lucas leaned back in the chair, his mind racing. This wasn't just a paperwork mistake. Karen had tried to buy the land. His grandfather refused. Then the moment he died, she exploited a gap in probate and swept in under the guise of community need. It wasn't neglect. It was a setup. Lucas snapped a photo of the letter and the old maps. He sent them to every contact he had left from his Denver days law school buddies, old professors, even a civil engineer who once moonlighted in land dispute cases. That night, while patching a fence on the North Ridge, his phone buzzed again. A text from his old friend Evelyn Shaw, now a property attorney in the city. This looks like fraud. Call me, tonight. Lucas smiled for the first time in days. Karen Detweiler may have used the system, but Lucas was about to fight back with every legal weapon she never saw coming. Lucas barely slept. By the time dawn hit the hills, he was already on the phone with Evelyn Shaw. She didn't waste time with small talk. Karen exploited probate lag, she said flatly. It's a dirty trick, but I've seen it before. She got the land classified as unclaimed by targeting a specific parcel without your name on title yet. Then her son's LLC scooped it up. Lucas paced the ranch porch, the boards creaking under his boots. How is that even legal? It toes the line, Evelyn replied. But if we can prove intent, that Karen planned the annexation before your grandfather's death and that her family personally profited from it, it moves from questionable into fraudulent. I'll need every document you've got. Letters, maps, dated notices, everything. I'll send it all today. Good. And Lucas, her voice softened. Don't confront her again. Let the legal side work. We don't want her covering tracks. But confrontation had a way of finding Lucas whether he wanted it or not. Later that morning, he was refilling the water troughs when the rumble of tires echoed down the dirt road. He looked up to see a white pickup with hazard lights flashing and a small construction crew unloading cones and metal poles from the bed. Lucas walked down the gravel path, the sun rising behind him, casting long shadows across the pasture. A man in a neon vest stepped forward. You the property owner? Yes, can I help you? We've got an order here, easement closure and private access gate installation. You'll need to use an alternate entrance from now on. Lucas narrowed his eyes. Alternate entrance. This road's been the main access point for 70 years. Not anymore, the man said, pointing to a folded document. According to this portion of the road is now owned by East Pines Holdings. Lucas grabbed the paper. It was stamped, signed, and approved. Just like that, his only paved road had been sliced out from under him. This is still under dispute, Lucas growled. The man shrugged. I just do what the work order says. If you've got a problem, take it up with whoever issued it. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Lucas stood there helpless as the crew installed the posts, anchored them in concrete, and bolted a shiny new keypad lock to the middle gate. By noon, the only reliable entrance to the south pasture and the rest of the ranch was sealed off. He couldn't move the tractor, couldn't deliver hay, couldn't even get the feed truck down the ridge without carving a whole new access road through rocky terrain. Lucas sat on the tailgate of his truck and stared at the gate like it had personally betrayed him. His phone buzzed again, another message from Evelyn. I've pulled the county auction documents. Something's off. The notification log is missing timestamps. That means there's no evidence you were ever properly notified of the sale. Lucas took a shaky breath. There it was, the thread they could pull. He looked back at the gate. But then, another noise broke through the stillness. An engine, high-pitched and fast. A second truck, this one a brand new Silverado, pulled up behind the crew. A young man with sunglasses and slicked hair stepped out. He wore a pressed shirt and loafers like he belonged in an office, not the dirt. Afternoon, he said with a grin. You must be McAllister. Lucas stood slowly. And you are Connor Detweiler, CEO of East Pines Holdings. So this was Karen's son, the man who now claimed to own part of the McAllister legacy. You know this isn't over, Lucas said quietly. Connor smiled and glanced at the gate. You're right, it's just beginning. We've got big plans for this property. Development, maybe even a small clubhouse. Once we get zoning, that is. Lucas stepped forward. You're not building anything. This land was never for sale, and you both know it. Connor chuckled. Then maybe you should have kept up with the paperwork, old man. He got back in the truck and peeled off, tires spitting dust into the air. Lucas stood in silence, the hum of anger ringing in his ears. He looked back at the ranch, the weathered barn, the pasture beyond, the old sycamore tree where his grandfather taught him to ride, and he made a vow right then, no matter what it took. No matter how long it took, he'd take every inch of that land back, because it wasn't just about land anymore, it was about legacy. And no Detweiler was going to steal it from under him. Lucas drove into the city the next morning, a man running on caffeine, spite, and old family pride. The road blurred past him, but his focus sharpened with every mile. By the time he reached Evelyn Shaw's office, he was ready for war. Her firm was tucked behind the county library, a plain brick building with no marble floors or corporate shine, but Evelyn didn't need flash. Her reputation carried more weight than any decor. Lucas found her inside a small office with towers of case files and a legal pad, covered in loops of perfect handwriting. She didn't look up when he entered. Put the documents on the table. I've already started the complaint. Lucas sat across from her and laid out the folder: maps, letters, HOA notices, the photograph of the foreclosure sign, and most importantly, the handwritten letter from his grandfather refusing Karen's offer. Evelyn picked it up like a loaded weapon. This is gold. Dated before the annexation. In his handwriting, that proves knowledge and objection prior to any official action. She sifted through the rest quickly. Now look here, she pointed to a line on the auction document. This says the parcel was listed as abandoned. But you were living on the property at the time. Do you have any utility bills? Receipts? I've got electricity and propane statements going back 6 months, Lucas said, pulling out a folded envelope. And cell tower pings, GPS logs. I work remotely from here. Perfect, we'll establish residency. That invalidates the abandonment claim. Combine that with the forged HOA expansion map and the sale to her son's LLC. This is looking like a textbook fraud case. Lucas leaned back, still processing. So what happens now? I'm filing for an emergency injunction to freeze development activity. Then we go after the annexation itself, challenge it on the grounds of undisclosed conflict of interest and fraudulent classification. And the gate, I'll include it. We'll argue interference with rightful property access. It'll take time, but if we win the injunction, they'll have to halt all activity until the case is resolved. Lucas exhaled. So there's a chance I get it back. Evelyn looked up, eyes sharp. Lucas, if what you've brought me holds in court, and I believe it will, you're not just getting it back. You're going to bury them. They spent the next several hours assembling the case. Evelyn typed, like a storm, cross-referencing zoning codes, citing HOA bylaws, and tracking every signature to a timeline that reeked of conspiracy. By dusk, she had built a dossier thick enough to drown an entire board meeting. As they finished, Lucas asked, "Why do you care about this so much?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She pulled a small photo frame from her drawer. Two kids, in cowboy hats standing on a dirt road, a faded barn behind them. "My uncle lost his farm to a bank error in '92, she said quietly. "They called it a clerical mistake. Sold it out from under him before he even knew. He never recovered. Ended up renting land from the same guy who stole it. I couldn't do anything then, but I can now." Lucas nodded. They weren't just fighting for a ranch anymore. This was personal for both of them. When he got back home that night, the gate was still there shining under the moonlight like a badge of stolen power. But Lucas didn't stop at the fence line this time. He walked the long way around, through the north ridge, past the tree line. His boots crunched softly on dry earth as he reached the barn and flicked on the light. He wasn't going anywhere. This was still his land, gate or no gate. And tomorrow, the war would begin in earnest, because Karen Detweiler had underestimated something powerful, a man with nothing left to lose. The attic had been untouched for years. Lucas had avoided it, partly out of respect for his grandfather's memory, partly because it always felt like stepping into a museum of ghosts. But now, it might hold the missing piece. He pulled down the creaky ladder and climbed into the dust-sweet darkness with a flashlight in hand. Old boxers lined the beam stools, heirlooms, war medals, yellowed newspapers wrapped in string. He moved slowly, brushing away cobwebs, scanning labels written in his grandfather's deliberate, blocky handwriting. Near the back, hidden beneath a wool blanket and rusted fishing tackle, he found an old metal lockbox. The key was still duct-taped underneath, just like his grandfather always taught him. Hide it in plain sight, boy, right where you'd never think to look. Inside was a stack of manila folders bound with twine, and a thick brown leather ledger that looked older than Lucas himself. He opened it slowly. The ledger was full of handwritten notes, each entry dated and underlined with sharp pencil strokes. It wasn't a diary. It was a record, a methodical tracking of every interaction his grandfather had ever had with Glenridge or anyone from the HOA. Lucas sat down on the attic floor, flipping through the pages. Some notes were simple. June 12th, woman from Glenridge came again. Left pamphlet. Tossed it. Others had more weight. August 7th, HOA wants to beautify borders again. Said they'd offer a deal. I told her the land stays as is, always. Then, one entry stopped him cold. October 22nd, Karen D. brought her lawyer, told me expansion is inevitable. Asked if I'd consider voluntary annexation in exchange for cash and HOA membership perks. I refused. Called her bluff. She didn't smile this time. Lucas stared at the date. October. 4 months before his grandfather passed. Long before any annexation filings had hit the public record. He dug deeper in the box and found a smaller envelope marked HOA notices. Inside were copies of every official communication sent to his grandfather, including one from Karen herself, bearing the HOA seal. It was dated after the rejection entry in the ledger and included language warning of escalated administrative action if silence continues. Lucas's pulse quickened. His grandfather had responded. Multiple times. He'd kept records, declined annexation offers, and still Karen had gone forward, betting no one would ever dig into the past. Lucas took photos of every page, then packed the ledger carefully into a canvas bag. He didn't know what evidence looked like to a court, but this felt like dynamite. Back downstairs, he called Evelyn. She answered on the first ring. I found something, he said. A ledger. My grandfather documented everything, every visit, every letter, including one where Karen came with a lawyer and he told her no. Dated months before she pushed annexation. There was silence on the line. Bring it to me. This isn't just evidence. This is intent. If he refused formally and she pushed through anyway, and then profited through her son's shell company, that's not a mistake. That's conspiracy. Lucas nodded. I'll be there first thing tomorrow. That night, unable to sleep, he sat on the porch watching headlights flicker from the highway in the distance. He didn't notice the black SUV until it slowed down outside the ranch gate. A man stepped out tall, in a windbreaker, clipboard in hand. He walked to the locked gate, shined a flashlight around, then scribbled something and drove off. Lucas stood, heart pounding. They were surveying again. He walked out to the gate and found a laminated tag zip-tied to the fence. Property inspection. Site prep pending, East Pines Holdings. He ripped it off and crushed it in his fist. The war was escalating. Karen wasn't just trying to steal the land, she was getting ready to build on it, pour concrete, put up fences, maybe even pave over his grandfather's ashes, which were scattered on that southern ridge. No, not while he was breathing. Lucas stared out across the dark hills, the weight of generations pressing on his shoulders. He had the ledger, he had the attorney, he had the proof, and in the morning, he would have the court's attention. The courthouse smelled like old paper and cold tile. Lucas sat on the front bench, the worn wood creaking beneath him as he adjusted the folder in his lap. Beside him, Evelyn Shaw was a pillar of stillness, her blazer sharp, her notes perfectly ordered, her expression unreadable. Across the aisle, Karen Detweiler sat with her attorney. As ever, she wore a pearl gray pantsuit, hair swept neatly back, eyes cool as if she were attending a luncheon. Not a public hearing about potential land fraud. But her son, Connor, wasn't quite so composed. He leaned forward in his seat, checking his phone too often, his tie slightly crooked. Lucas could see the tension in his jaw. The cracks were starting to show. The courtroom filled slowly with curious locals and quiet reporters. After weeks of rising gossip, HOA President sells ranch. Land to her own son. Interest had spread beyond Glenn. The judge, a tall man with silver glasses and a slow, deliberate voice, entered and called the hearing to order. Evelyn stood first. Your Honor, she began. We are petitioning for immediate injunction and reversal of a fraudulent foreclosure and sale. The evidence will show that the annexation of Parcel 79B was obtained through manipulation of legal process, lack of due notice, and a direct conflict of interest. The judge raised an eyebrow. Go on. Evelyn opened the folder. She began with the letter, Lucas's grandfather's handwritten note declining Karen's offer to annex the land. Then came the ledger. Page after page of detailed records of Karen's repeated visits and pressure tactics. She walked the court through the timeline: the death of Lucas's grandfather, the delay in probate, the rapid annexation filing with no notice, and the sale to East Pines Holdings, a company owned by Connor Detweiler. Karen's lawyer objected midway, claiming the HOA followed all required procedures. Evelyn responded by dropping the county's notification records onto the podium records that had no timestamps confirming notice had ever been sent to Lucas. And finally, Evelyn said, lifting one last page, here is the corporate registration of East Pines Holdings, filed by Mr. Connor Detweiler, less than 1 week before the parcel's auction. He was the only bidder, and Mrs. Detweiler signed off on the sale. A hush fell over the room. The judge turned to Karen. Mrs. Detweiler, are you aware that your son was the buyer of the property in question? Karen stood slowly. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of who the buyer was. It was an open auction. Evelyn snapped back. Public auction notices were never published in a paper with county-wide circulation, only in the Glen Ridge HOA newsletter. No outside bidders had access. It was designed that way. Karen's lawyer objected again, but the judge waved him off. Connor shifted in his chair. His face had gone pale. The judge steepled his fingers. So, to summarize, the HOA president pushed for annexation of a ranch that had rejected inclusion. No personal notice was sent to the current occupant. Annexation was granted while title transfer was in probate. Property was listed as abandoned, despite clear evidence of occupation. It was then sold to a company owned by the president's son, in a closed-circle auction with no outside notification. Karen tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand. I've seen enough for now. This court grants an immediate injunction, halting any development or construction on Parcel 79B. Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into the annexation process and the HOA's internal records. Any zoning decisions related to this land are frozen, pending outcome. Lucas exhaled sharply, the tension leaving his body like air from a balloon. He glanced over at Karen, whose smile had vanished for the first time. She sat rigid, jaw clenched, hands folded too tightly in her lap as the courtroom cleared. Evelyn leaned toward Lucas. This is just the beginning, she said. We haven't even touched civil damages. Once we prove this was intentional, you can sue for everything they gained and everything you lost. Lucas stood, the weight on his shoulders beginning to lift. His grandfather's land wasn't lost. Not yet, and now. The people who tried to steal it were facing the reckoning they thought they'd never see. 2 months later, the ranch looked almost the same. The wild grass was taller, the barn a little more sun-faded, but the silence that settled over it was no longer one of defeat. It was peace returning. It was something being put back in its rightful place. Lucas leaned against the porch post, a mug of black coffee in hand, watching the early light stretch over the south pasture. The same strip of land Karen Detweiler had once tried to steal with a pen and a smile. But not anymore. The lawsuit had concluded the day. Before Evelyn had stood at the front of the courtroom, with the confidence of a woman holding the last nail for a coffin she'd already built. The county's investigation revealed a web of misconduct, manipulated district lines, intentionally suppressed notices, and internal HOA emails between Karen and Connor that detailed their strategy like it was a chess game in one message. Karen had written, "Once we secure that southern stretch, the rest of the ranch will crumble in value. Connor should bid through East Pines at auction. Nobody else will be watching. I've made sure of it." That email, printed and enlarged in court, had been the final blow. Karen Detweiler was removed from the HOA board and faced formal charges of fraud, conspiracy, and conflict of interest. The court nullified the land sale and voided the annexation entirely. Parcel 79B was legally restored to Lucas, along with a hefty judgment in his favor for damages and legal fees. As for Connor, he pled out before trial. His company was dissolved. He'd be paying restitution to Lucas for the next decade. But money wasn't what Lucas had fought for. It never was. It was the sunrise over his family's land, untouched. The sound of the wind rolling across open fields. The barn, the tree line, the south pasture reclaimed. Evelyn pulled up the drive just after 7. She stepped out with her usual tote bag full of papers, but her face was lighter now. The war was over. Everything filed, she said. The property is fully clear. You're safe now. Lucas handed her a cup of coffee and nodded. You did all this for a client who brought you a box of old receipts and a story. You brought me a cause, she said. And a reason. They walked together to the pasture. A few survey stakes still stuck in the soil remnants of Karen's plans, but they'd be pulled up soon enough. No clubhouse. No paved road. No HOA extension creeping in like a vine, just dirt, grass and legacy. You're going to stay? Evelyn asked. Lucas looked around. I think I have to. This land fought for me while I fought for it. Feels wrong to leave it now, she smiled. Then build something from it. Something that honors him. He thought about that all day. That evening, while cleaning out the shed, Lucas stumbled upon a concrete marker, half buried in the dirt. It was old, weathered, chipped, but unmistakably a survey post. He cleared the soil around it, revealing an etched date, 1946. And beneath that, McAllister boundary registered with county. Evelyn came to look at it the next morning, kneeling beside it with narrowed eyes. This predates Glenridge by 50 years, she whispered. It was always your land. Even before the lines, the maps, the politics. This proves it. Karen had tried to redraw borders, but the land itself had remembered. Lucas placed a hand on the marker, as if thanking it for holding its ground. Then he stood up, eyes scanning the hills, the oaks, the creeks that still ran in spring. He thought of his grandfather, his father, the generations who had called this place home. It was never about acreage, it was about belonging. And that no matter how slick the paperwork or sharp the lawyers, could never be bought for $25,000. The ranch had never been for sale, and now it never would be.